What the Hopi said about the sky people who built the mesas, documented in 1,888 inches. 1,888. A government ethnographer named Jesse Walter Fuchs traveled to the Hopi Mesas in what is now northeastern Arizona and wrote down what the elders told him. Not a summary. Not an interpretation filtered through his own assumptions. The actual words, as closely as translation allowed, transcribed into his field notebooks and archived in the Bureau of American Ethnology records. Those records still exist. They are not secret. You can request them. What is striking is how rarely anyone does. What Fuchs recorded that year is one of the stranger documents in the American Southwest Ethnographic Archive. The Hopi elders he spoke with described, in specific and consistent terms, a group of beings they called kachinas, not spirit figures in the popular decorative sense, not the wooden dolls sold in tourist shops. Something older. Beings who came from above, who carried knowledge of building and agriculture and astronomy, who taught the Hopi ancestors and then departed, and who promised to return. This alone is not unusual. Traditions of sky ancestors exist across many cultures, and most historians file them under mythology and move on. What is unusual is the architecture. The Hopi mesas rise out of the desert plateaus of northeastern Arizona in a geological formation so specific that early European travelers described them as artificial, not natural, artificial. The three main mesas, called First Mesa, Second Mesa, and Third Mesa, are narrow, elevated plateaus of sandstone rising several hundred feet above the surrounding desert. The villages on top of them, Walpi, Mishongnovi, Oraibi, are among the oldest continuously inhabited settlements in North America. Oraibi is estimated at approximately 850 years old based on dendrochronology, but the Hopi oral tradition says Oraibi did not begin 850 years ago. It says the mesas were already structures when the Hopi ancestors arrived, that the people who built them were gone, and what remained were the buildings and the knowledge. Fuchs noted this. He noted it, flagged it as anomalous, and moved on to other observations. What he did not do, and what almost no one after him did, was ask the follow-up question. If the oral tradition says the mesas were already built, then who built them, and where did they go? The answer the Hopi gave has two parts. The first part is architectural. The pre-Hopi builders of the mesas were described consistently as skilled in stone that required no mortar. Dry stone construction of a quality that, in 1888, American engineers had not replicated. The walls of the oldest structures at Walpi and at the cliff. I have to pause here for a second, because what I just described, that is one case from a much larger pattern. There are 35 documented cases in a document I put together. Different cities, different decades, different types of evidence. Every single one follows the same sequence: discovered, documented, acquired, disappeared. I could not fit all of it into a video. It's in the pinned comment below. Find it before we continue. And the specific grain and fracture patterns of the stone being worked. The people who built like that either had tools we have not found, or time we have not accounted for, or both. And the Hopi said those people came from the sky. Now here is where the standard academic response kicks in. The sky, in oral traditions, means many things. It can mean another region. It can mean a higher valley. It can mean a metaphysical origin in religious cosmology. The sky people might have been a neighboring group from higher elevation. They might have been a metaphor for spiritual authority. The academic response is that we cannot take the sky claim literally. That is a reasonable position. But notice what it does. It takes the oral tradition seriously enough to record it, then interprets the uncomfortable part away. The building claim, the precision stonework, the departure and promise of return, all of that survives in the academic literature. The sky origin is consistently reframed as metaphor. This is not neutral interpretation. It is a selection. And patterns of selection in the academic record of indigenous oral traditions are worth examining because those patterns are rarely random. The Smithsonian Bureau of American Ethnology, which employed Fuchs and funded his 1,888 fieldwork, had a specific institutional interest in the American Southwest in the late 19th century. That interest was not purely scientific. The 1880s were a decade in which the federal government was formalizing land claims across the Southwest, displacing indigenous communities from territories they had occupied for centuries, and establishing the legal foundation for what would become a massive transfer of land to railroad companies, mining interests, and agricultural developers. The Hopi lands were part of that process. The Navajo Wars ended in 1868. The Apache resistance collapsed in 1886 with Geronimo's surrender. By 1888, the Southwest was effectively pacified and open for documentation, survey, and classification. What ethnographers like Fuchs were doing in the field was simultaneously scientific and administrative, recording oral traditions, photographing structures, mapping settlement patterns, producing the knowledge base that would inform decisions about which lands had documented native occupation and which could be argued effectively unclaimed. The timing matters. Before I go further, that document in the pinned comment. If you have not found it yet, go there now, because everything I cover in these videos is one piece of a pattern that only becomes visible when you see all 35 cases together. The document shows you the full pattern. What I can show you here is the surface. What is down there is everything underneath it. Pinned comment, now, then come back. Memory. They record who was here, who built what, who has rights to what territory. The Hopi account of Sky People builders who preceded them is, in the framework of indigenous land tenure, a property document. Fuchs recorded it. The Bureau of American Ethnology archived it. And then the formal processes of Western legal interpretation, which require written documentation in recognizable forms, treated the Mesa settlements as territories subject to federal management, regardless of what the oral record said. The Sky People story was not suppressed. It was irrelevant. In a legal system designed around different evidentiary standards, irrelevant and suppressed produce the same outcome. What remained were the buildings. The cliff dwellings of Canyon de Chelly, 20 miles east of the Hopi Mesas, contain some of the most technically sophisticated pre-industrial stonework in North America. The White House ruin, built into a cliff alcove 200 feet above the canyon floor, has walls of shaped sandstone, whose plastered surfaces still show traces of geometric painted decoration from the 12th century. The construction involved transporting and shaping stone in a location accessible only by hand, and toe holds cut into vertical sandstone. It was occupied, abandoned, and reoccupied by Navajo farmers in the 19th century, who added their own structures below. The Hopi oral tradition connects these canyon dwellings to the Sky People narrative. The builders who came and went left their constructions behind. The structures outlasted whoever made them. And the people who came after, the ancestors of the Hopi, learned from the structures themselves what the builders knew. Successor cultures inheriting the physical infrastructure of predecessors is documented everywhere from the European Middle Ages to the Amazon basin. What is unusual is that the Hopi account names the predecessors, gives them a specific origin, and describes a specific departure. They went back up. The wording in Fuchs' transcription is careful. The elders he spoke with used terms that, in translation, indicated a vertical departure, not migration to another region, not death. A return to the place of origin, which was described spatially as above. The Kachina tradition, which encodes this history in ceremonial practice, preserves the return narrative in specific ritual form. Kachinas are not simply spirits in the generic sense. They are understood as the Sky People themselves, or their representatives, returning periodically to check on the people they taught. The Kachina season runs from roughly the winter solstice to midsummer, after which the Kachinas are said to return to the San Francisco peaks north of Flagstaff and then upward. The ceremony marking their departure has been performed continuously, scholars estimate, for somewhere between 600 and 1,000 years. A ceremony performed for 1,000 years is not a casual custom. It is infrastructure. The same impulse that builds stone walls lasting 8 centuries builds ceremonies that encode the reason for the walls. The walls and the ceremony point at the same source. Now, the economic angle. By 1890, 2 years after Fuchs' fieldwork, the Atlantic and Pacific Railroad had laid track through northern Arizona. By 1893, the World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago was generating national interest in the southwest as a tourism destination. The Fred Harvey Company began building hotels along the rail lines. Hopi pottery, kachina dolls, and woven goods began appearing in Harvey House shops, classified as authentic native crafts, stripped of their ceremonial and legal context, and sold to tourists as decorative objects. The transformation took less than a decade. Knowledge that was a property document became tourist merchandise. Ceremonial objects that encoded 1,000 years of continuous practice became collectibles. The mesas became destinations rather than evidence. This is the economic mechanism that the revisionist framework is pointing at, not a deliberate conspiracy in the dramatized sense. A structural incentive system in which the most profitable interpretation of a complex historical record is also the interpretation that happens to omit the parts inconvenient for property rights. The Sky People story, taken seriously, raises questions about prior occupation and prior construction that have no clean resolution in Western property law. Classified as mythology, it raises no such questions. It can be preserved in a museum and sold in a gift shop. The classification did both things simultaneously, and the buildings remain. The Hopi have occupied their mesas continuously. The villages at Walpi and Oribe have been inhabited for longer than most European nations have existed in their current form. Oribe has a documented occupation of approximately 850 years, but the Hopi dispute that date as representing only the point where Western dendrochronology begins, not the point where Hopi occupation began. They say it is older. The dry stone walls say it is older. Fuchs' own notes say it is complicated. And the accounts he recorded in 1888 from elders transmitting knowledge passed down through many generations say that the mesas were not built by the Hopi ancestors at all, that the Hopi arrived to find them standing. If that is true, then whoever built the Hopi mesas and the Canyon de Chelly dwellings and the dozens of related sites across the Colorado Plateau represents a civilization for which we have structures and oral records and zero written documentation. A civilization that achieved precision dry stone construction, astronomical alignment in building orientation, and managed agriculture in one of the most water-scarce environments in North America, and then departed. Departed is the word the Hopi use. Not died. Not migrated. Departed. The difference matters because departed implies intentionality. It implies a plan and a destination. It implies that the builders knew what they were leaving and why. What they left behind was occupied by the people they had taught, and what those people preserved in ceremony and stonework and oral tradition is still there. On the mesas, in the archives, in the records, Fuchs made in 1888 and did not fully understand, and neither did the institution that sent him. Understanding them now requires asking what it would mean if the Hopi elders were describing something literal. Not because the literal interpretation is proven. It is not. But because the figurative interpretation has been the default for 130 years, and it produces a picture with gaps, the gap is always the same. Before the Hopi, after the Sky People, between the construction and the arrival, there is a period for which the record is absent. The structures exist on both sides of it. The oral tradition exists on both sides of it. The gap is described by the Hopi as the interval between the Sky People's departure and their own ancestors' arrival. What happened in that interval is what we do not know. And what we do not know about that interval belongs to the same category of unknown as the architecturally anomalous structures in other parts of the world at roughly similar periods. The same category as the demographic gaps in the 18th century European record, the same category as the Amazon civilization that grew for thousands of years and vanished before European contact. The Hopi mesas are part of that category. They were documented in 1888 by a man who was doing his job in the service of institutions that had other priorities, and the account he produced is still sitting in the archive, still specific, still internally consistent, still unexplained by the standard interpretation. The Sky People built something that lasted. The question we have not asked is what else they built, where else they built it, and what the record looks like if we stop treating the sky as a metaphor. The mesas are still there. The walls fit without mortar. The ceremony marks the departure every year, as it has for 1,000 years. The archive has been open this whole time. If this raised a question you cannot shake, share it with someone who would ask the same. That is how this kind of research moves. Stay curious.